to Unleash Your Inner Goldilocks, how to get it just right. Thank you so much for joining us for another hour of insightful and exciting conversation. And I cannot wait for you to meet my guest today, joining us all the way from Australia, but she is traveling and working in the US. So I am glad that she is now waking up at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning to join us. Cathy, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Cass. It's a pleasure to be here. And yes, you know, I'm glad that I'm not waking up at 1 o'clock in the morning, although I would.
Absolutely, me too. So welcome to the US. And as we get the conversation started, I want us to think about what we are going to talk today and why it's important. The impact of leadership development in children of developing countries. It's a very nuanced topic. We're going to look at what does leadership development for children look like? What does it mean for children all over the world? And why is it different? And how should it be different for children in the developing world? And as we dive into this very meaty, very deep conversation, I want us to keep in mind the value and the reminder Goldilocks is bringing us into this conversation. Goldilocks is all about taking perspective, making sure we don't show up too hot, we don't show up too cold, and we truly are engaging in a way that it is meaningful to us and it's allowing us to accomplish what we have at heart, right? And children ultimately are the future of our world. And Goldilocks was a child. She knew innately what she needed and what she wanted to make that day successful, to make that day impactful for her. All children inherently know that. If we've spent any time with children, we know that we know. Even if it's a kitten or a puppy, they know exactly what they want, how they're going to have the adults help them accomplish it. And then they're going to go after truly wrapping us around that little finger, and we willingly do everything they want us to do with just one look, with just one sound, with one giggle, one wag of the tail, right? Whether it's a puppy, a kitten, or a child, they know how to draw that out. So that leadership skill of influence and driving the results is inherently in every creature. Somehow life beats it out of us as we grow up, because we are tending to believe that there is a certain way to be, and the innate way that it flows from us may not be acceptable. How do we get to children before they get to that point of jadedness, before they stop being idealistic, before they let go of the attitude that I can accomplish anything? And everybody around me is going to work with me to accomplish this because this is fun. This is fun. And children respond to that. Children innately know that. How do we keep that in them as they grow? And how do we help them become the best leaders they can be? And then what do we need to do when these children come from struggling backgrounds, struggling environments, developing nations? And what more do we need to give them? Because they are going to need that little extra sauce, that extra catalyst to drive the change they need in an environment that is not always conducive. Keeping that in mind, Cathy, let's talk about what got you into this area. You and I talk about this all the time. It is not something we grew up saying we're going to do, but we find our calling and we find ourselves there. How did it happen for you?
Interesting that you know, this topic is really about children. And it was one of my children that guided me. You know, at the age of 16, my daughter, when Ebola broke out, she sat at the dining table and said, well, I'm going to be finishing school next year. So when I finish, I want to take some time off and go and help, do something meaningful. And so she landed in Africa. She said, that's where I'm going to go. So here it is, a 16-year-old, Ebola breaking out, and thinking, I want to do something different. I want to help. So a child started my journey. She's always been fascinated and loved children. And so working in orphanages was a natural thing for her. So here she is, she's wagging her tail. So I'm going to make it happen, right? So, and to be honest, Cass, this was her journey. It wasn't mine. I was going to just support her. Being Africa, having Ebola breaking out, and actually also wanting to spend time in the middle of Gorogoro, which is living with a Maasai, was an added risk. So for me, it was about mitigating risk more than anything else. So what happened was I said to her, go off, you'll spend a month there. We'll actually structure it so that you're with projects abroad. There's an element of safety there. And then I'll come and join you, particularly whilst you are actually going to spend time living with a Maasai. So that's really the start of it. What happened whilst we were there was I would see this, she had just turned 17. This 17-year-old amongst these kids that were full of joy, playing in dirt, kicking around stones as she was running and chasing them, and they were playing whatever sport it was with that stone, right? That pure joy really allowed me to sit back and think, my goodness, we can make so much impact with so little for somebody who actually needed it, rather than the egoic life that we were actually leading and living back home. So as we were working in orphanages, we started to put in structure. And that was because other volunteers were turning up, but not knowing exactly what to do. So it was creating a daily structure for the volunteers, but then also actually putting in a little bit of structure for the kids, taking them to the doctors because I'd never seen a doctor before. That was the catalyst. That then,
Isn't that amazing?
my mind
That
was
is
ticking,
so
right?
amazing, right? Because think about the fact that if you were like some parents who tell the child it's dangerous, don't go.
Absolutely.
You had innately the courage to say, you know what, this is what my baby wants to explore. I'm going to let her, but I do have my concerns. And the way I'm going to address my concern is not by stopping her, but I'm going to go with her. And I'm a firm believer that when we engage with people, even when we believe we're the ones giving, life touches us in so many different ways. The giver is as much transformed as the receiver, and sometimes even so much more.
Without a doubt, in every experience, in every encounter, both parties or all parties actually have that ripple effect occurring. It's just different for everybody. So the impact that we're choosing to make in any given situation is really important. We need to be conscious and intentional in every situation. That then means that the ripple, that we're creating is a positive one. And so
I love hearing you talk about this, Cathy. And so, true, your daughter got you engaged. And when you engaged from a protective instinct, obviously you're there in your maternal role, but you can't say, I'm only going to be a mother to my child. These are all our children. And something allowed you to see them all as your children. And it was time for you to start stepping in and making a difference in their life. Not all parents can do that, and not all adults can do that. I really want to touch on the fact that what makes a person able to look at them all as our children, whether we have children or not? And how can one develop that skill? Because that is what's going to make the world a better place.
I think that probably comes down to vulnerability, allowing yourself to be seen in that capacity of a nurturer, a carer. It's not always easy. You have to actually open up. You have to actually take time. You need to pause in any moment And that pausing isn't just to talk, it's also to listen. And that's, I think, what bridges the gap too. Listening just to better understand is so important in every relationship, but particularly for a child. It's interesting, I have so many conversations, and particularly with parents who say, my kids don't say that to me. I ask them the question and they just shrug. And I often say, just pause. We try and fill that gap, that void. But if we pause and genuinely allow them to see that we want to hear what they have to say, not guide them into telling us what they think we want to hear, but just let them speak, we bridge that gap, no matter who it is, whether it's a stranger, whether it's a child that you don't know, or whether it's your own child. And I think that's probably the gift that we can actually give in any given moment. And that's what actually enables us to, I guess, have that relationship and build that rapport with any child.
Mm-hmm. And beautifully said, Cathy. Two things resonated with me based on what you said. One is listen. Paul Tillich says it better than anybody else. The first act of love is to listen. And so whether we are communicating and engaging with an adult or a child or anybody in between, that ability to listen is reminding them that they're important, this moment matters, and I'm going to be here till you're ready to tell me and till you're done telling me. And that is so powerful that we forget in the adult world. And the second thing that resonated with me is the fact that we need to pause. And to me, that is cultural. There are three different ways people communicate, right? The Asian tradition is that you are invited to talk. And then when we are invited, you speak up. And if people don't say anything, there is a pause. We're very comfortable with a long pause. People tease me, my whole family can sit down after dinner and we can actually communicate without words. And for a whole half an hour, we can sit and be in each other's company without verbally uttering anything. The Latin American culture, the way they show love is they talk over one another. Right? And the American culture, American is a little different from the rest of Europe. The American way is the minute you take a pause to breathe, somebody else jumps in. Right? So how do we unpack this and teach adults to pause so that they truly are inviting the children to engage? Because if the adults haven't mastered the pause and haven't mastered the listening, children are just shutting down.
I think we actually just need to be a lot more open about it. Sharing the, I guess, feedback of what happens when we're enabled to speak then actually allows somebody else to take on board what that would mean for them too. You actually highlighted something I think that resonates for me too, and that was in respect to waiting for that moment of pause before we speak. I think that that's also an Australian culture. It's almost giving you the rite of passage that, okay, it's your turn. It's almost like that roundabout. When you hit that roundabout and that's that entry point, you can come in now, right? But Cass, speaking about it, I think that's one thing that we don't necessarily do. We perhaps try and practice it, but until, again, I go back to that intentionally conscious, until we have that discussion, about this is what happens for me. I actually feel like I want to say something, but I know I need to hold back. Just sharing that information with someone then enables them to think about, how do I contribute? And that's all it is. That self-reflection of how do I contribute and how do I actually want to actually enable somebody else to be able to do that. Otherwise, we just continue on our merry-go-round, right?
Absolutely. And then we feel like a hamster, right?
Yeah.
So children in developing countries live very differently from children in developed countries. I am a child from the developing world. I inherently have experienced it. As you look at these cultures, as you are spending time with children, what are you seeing to be different with these poorer, developing third world country children compared to the developed world children? Because recognizing that is the first step to then putting all the other building blocks in place.
Yeah, I think one of the things for me is, I guess, we often work with children that are orphaned. So that probably adds another layer of complexity. For them, they actually feel like, I see that they feel like they need to belong. So that one-on-one attention is something that they have been lacking and that they miss. So whilst for me, we might actually be teaching, a group of children, it is also recognizing through that period to dedicate time one-on-one, to actually have that eyeball connection, to allow them to be seen. And then the second step is to allow them to be heard. Giving them that opportunity actually gives them a sense of confidence in addition to belonging. And I think that confidence is at the heart of everything when it comes to children actually discovering who they are, as opposed to who they think that they need to be by looking at whatever else is happening around them. That's, for us, I think that's the catalyst that actually makes us follow, do what somebody else is doing as adults, because we don't want to stand out, or we don't want that finger pointed up, oh my gosh, they're different. So we start to conform, but we lose ourselves. So as children, they haven't quite mastered why they're actually following everyone. But if we encourage them to continue to have their voice for who they choose to be, and to continue that, that's through building their confidence. So that's the starting block. If we can make that their entire being, be confident, have your voice, that then gives them that roadmap of becoming the adult and still staying who they are.
I'm loving what I'm hearing, and I'm actually loving what you're doing, because this is not something you're just talking, you're actually doing it. And when we start thinking about children being empowered to be seen and heard, and in that process, we are truly giving them some additional skills and capabilities that they can embrace and be unique, right? You had mentioned that children start imitating because they are supposed to be like somebody. Just this morning, somebody was talking to me about Cass. Somebody's telling me, people talk about how we need to be normal. What is normal? I said, there is no normal. We are each individually unique. Like, no two snowflakes are the same. I'm from Chicago, right? I live in Chicago. And it doesn't mean the winter snowflakes are not pretty because they're all different. It actually makes it that much more vibrant. Why are we not allowing every child to be what they are meant to be, as you say, and then stop adults from trying to make them become a mini me?
It's that fear of being seen different, I think, as adults. Again, it comes back to that belonging, but how do we actually understand what belonging means? We don't see it from within, we see it from somebody else. And that's, I think, another trait that we tend to develop, because if we actually say something that's not, it's even in business, if we say something that doesn't actually align with everybody else, then everybody stops to look and go, you're different. They're not necessarily taking on board or taking that moment to think about, now, hang on a minute, that's a different point of view. What have I potentially missed? The initial thing is, that's not what we all think. So it's that alignment, when we have the masses align, all of a sudden that's what's right. And so therefore you become that black sheep that has this different perspective, right? And nobody wants to be that black sheep. but you could be right. That's how we have innovation, right?
Absolutely.
So it's enabling kids to, I guess, continue to be comfortable with, I keep going back to who they choose to be. It is a choice. And I think that that's the one thing that we need to continue to encourage. Who do you want to be? Tell me about that. Let them explore what that ultimately means for them. That's what's going to bring them joy. You think about, as we actually continue our pursuit of, what it is that we want from life, that joy seems to dissipate. And that joy dissipates because we're letting a little bit more of ourselves go so that we can conform. So why not actually enable that? That inner child is about joy. That's what we want to actually reignite. So when we look at kids, I developed, it's interesting, my programs for the kids that we actually run, they're not one-day programs. They're actually 4-week programs. And it's about enabling the child to take away the skills and the tools that we've actually shown them what is possible in those lessons, to work on it, and then to come back and then build on that. Add the next session. Go out, explore, come back, and we keep building. The next stage, which is, what I call the Form 4 stage, so 15, 17-year-olds, is 6-week program. And then as they actually finish school, it's 6-month programs. And it's always instilling that entrepreneurial mindset as well, because that then means that we are enabling that mitigating risk, the critical thinking, as opposed to squashing that. So as leaders, that then means that they can all lead, because they're always going in and thinking about not just self, but of others as they continue their roadmap forward, right?
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you went there, Cathy, and you were reading my mind. So your program is tiered so that as the child grows, the stratification grows with the child. And the child is being built piece by piece, but you've already laid the foundation. A lot of times people just go in, swoop in, do something for a day or two, take pictures, and they're gone. That doesn't create lasting change, and it doesn't truly inculcate lasting leadership. So when we talk about helping young people become leaders, to me, the first thing we're doing is we are helping them lead their own life.
Yep.
And so as they lead their life, they need to look at what is ahead. And I love how you phrase the question, what do you want to be? Too many times people ask children, what do you want to do? They're two distinctively different questions. Talk to us about why you ask children, what do you want to be? And why is that so much more impactful and transformative for the child than asking them, what do you want to do?
I see that as a limitation. You think about, I go back to my own childhood. What do you want to do? That means that I need to then actually relate to what I already know, what is already in existence. And so therefore, that's really restrictive, particularly in today's society. We don't know what's actually going to be something that's required, right, in 50 years' time, in 10 years' time even. So asking a child, what do you want to do, means that they're actually looking within for the things that they enjoy doing. Isn't that what we want for them? When we do the things that we enjoy, not only are we actually proficient, we know how to mitigate risk because we've trialed those things, but we also actually start thinking limitlessly. Knowing what you want to do is actually about what you want to do to impact humanity, to impact the world. So it actually gets them thinking outside of a job. We don't need to look at a career or our future within the confines of a job. It's really about us, how we want to contribute as a person. And so that's the reason why I specifically reframe that. And I keep saying that, particularly in universities, we need to stop that from a career perspective. Even, what do you want to study? How about we think about what we want to do and how we want to contribute before we even look at what courses we want to do, what study we want to do. It's quite simple. One word changes the entire outlook. That one word is also, restrictive when we ask a child, well, what if you do this? What if actually creates doubt? But if we say, what else? What else is possible? See how that one word changes the entire outlook. It gives you opportunity. That's all it is. It's simple things.
And language is very beautiful. And language can be scary based on how you use it and how people around us use it. I have been reading some research that talks about 75 to 80% of children, if you ask them to finish the sentence, I am, they always finish it with something negative. I am fat, I am ugly, I am stupid, I am poor, I am this, I am that. They haven't formed any insights about the world other than they're taking input. And at that input stage, what is being poured into them by the adults around them, that is also critical. You are working with orphans, so they don't have too much of that, but then they have a sense of loss. They feel like, bereft because there's nothing around them that is nurturing and loving and caring. How can you take what you're doing with the orphans in parts of Africa and then bring it to all the children in developing countries, and then beyond that to all the children? Because each of them in their own environment are feeling and experiencing things differently.
I think one of the ways that it doesn't really matter who you're actually working with is to enable a child, an adult, whoever it is, to understand what their values are, what's important for them. If we start with that, that then enables us to identify what it is that's not only important to us, but the things that we want to make sure that we protect. So we build that into our programs, understanding the power of values. So we bring it quite back into self, and then we actually structure boundaries around that. Can you think, like when I actually engage in business, that's at the core of who I choose to work with. If our values align, it means that I'm actually honoring myself. And as a child, isn't that what we want them to do? No matter who they are, honor yourself, know what's important for you, and then actually make sure that you protect yourself, which is what the boundaries is about. That's, your no-go zone. You know exactly where you can go before you compromise yourself based on what is important to you, those values. So if we actually enable children to understand that and then build their lives from that, as adults, we become so powerful because we are continuously looking within as opposed to the outside world to tell us who we are, what's important to us, who we want to actually do work with, who we choose to have friends with, because there's that alignment, there's that synchronicity, and that then actually enables us to build trust. There's so many things that are actually based on that foundation of understanding who you are and what's important to you through values, that we then live a life full of purpose.
So as I hear you expand on this, what is coming up for me is here I am living and working in a community where there is no family structure, but there are social pressures. And what I mean by that is men are like butterflies. They go from flower to flower. And the flowers turn into fruits, right? So women have children from multiple men, and women end up raising children. And how mothers raise sons are different from how they raise daughters. And they look at daughters as if they're another pair of hands to do housework, or I can trade them for things. And in the absence of values, maternal values sometimes, I got a call the week of Christmas that a mother traded her 13-year-old daughter for Christmas gifts. I get told by somebody that there is a woman in the village, because she is unable to make ends meet, she is renting out her daughter, a 10-year-old daughter, for $10 a day. And grown men are engaging in this. How can we talk values, and how can we truly impart values for these children to believe in adults when they're exposed to these kind of things?
You know, the conversations go back to almost the simplistic nature. What makes you feel good? You know, it's really hard, particularly for children who are living that sort of a life, to have a perception or an understanding of, you know, what a privileged child might actually experience. So taking that back to, how do you feel in this situation? How does that make you feel? And enabling them to then explore that, and then actually making that situation and be looked at through values. You know, so if somebody actually gives you candy but then actually hits you, how does that make you feel? What's the association that you then have with that? What would make you feel good? What makes you feel happy? You have to sometimes break things down to the most simple things for somebody to be able to relate to something that they've never experienced. And the only way that we can do that is through emotion. So for that child, you know, maybe they will feel good because they're going to get a candy after they've done whatever it is that they've been asked to do. But the moment we then put them back into that situation to repeat, we have to go back. Does that make you feel good? So it's just opening their minds up to what's good, what's not good. And then allowing them to attach that to, and how would I make you feel good? So we can actually then get them to explore of, what could I do differently for you to enable you to feel happy, to feel safe. Safety is actually a really big thing, and they may not necessarily understand it, but putting it into context for them where they can understand the differences enables them to shift and understand what potentially may be possible. It's not always possible, Cass, in those situations. We know that. But there may be one moment where that pattern might be able to break. That's an opportunity to enable them to see what else is possible and maybe take that leap. And that's what we're wanting to do in those situations. Now, I remember sitting with a Maasai warrior and almost asking me, not too dissimilar a question, but he said to me, Cathy, I'm starting a Duputu Foundation. And I said, what's that, Kimani? And he said, I actually want young kids, young girls specifically, to say no to circumcision, to say no to being married at the age of 11 and 12, and to say yes to education. You know, in that moment, I think I realized lots of things, but one was how privileged I am. And then secondly, that privilege of being a middle-aged white Western woman maybe doesn't have a voice or an opinion in that situation, because I'm sitting in the middle of Gorogoro, which is Maasai land. How could I possibly actually have a perspective of what that 6-year-old is thinking, experiencing, whilst her mother is right next to her? I don't want her to disrespect her mother. I know what my values are, but I also have to be mindful of the culture. Nor do I actually know the relationship of what that mother has. She may want that for her daughter, but I can't be the voice that says that. Somehow we have to actually enable that discussion to take place with that mother and the daughter, and then potentially the grandmother, but everybody else in that community. So I can have my opinions. I can actually share my thoughts around what type of discussion they can have, but they need to have that discussion.
Totally hear you. Totally hear you. And before I open this conversation up with our live audience, I want you to share with us if there were 3 foundational leadership skills you will give every child. What would those 3 be?
I'm going to start with confidence. If there's anything that anybody needs, it's to be confident in who they are. So building that. The second thing is going back to values. When they actually understand what's important for them, that then means that they can actually navigate their roadmap forward. And the third thing is to have a voice. It's okay to be different. More importantly, to enable them to see that when they share their voice of difference, it also gives others permission to do the same.
I am smiling because I am so glad to hear you share those 3 top leadership skills, because that's what we need for adults too. Have the confidence to be who you are, because you were sent here for a reason, and it is not somebody else's reason. And to actually be able to have values that matter to you, and then also then have a voice so that you can be seen and heard.
Yeah.
I'm loving that. Loving that. I can talk about it all day with you, but I'm going to open this up for a conversation with our audience here, because I know they're waiting to talk to you and share their thoughts and ask any questions.
I welcome that. It's interesting. I'm actually here for a fundraiser for Haiti, and that was one of the discussions that we were having last night. And looking at the leadership programs, particularly, education is the key, to the future. So if we can actually educate the kids to think differently, to be different to what they're already experiencing, that's then going to enable them to be the future leaders. And we're doing that from within while they're maintaining their culture, right?
Totally. Go ahead, Robin.
Oh my goodness, it is so great to be here. I've had to miss several weeks because of traveling in different time zones, but it's great to be here. And Cathy, you already touched on everyone. I was writing down questions. You touched on all of them so beautifully. I especially loved your comment that they had such pure joy despite having so little. That really touched my heart. And one thing I would ask is, you've already touched on, building their strengths, building their belief in, yes, I can do something, talking about their, being as opposed to only doing what you want to be versus what you want to do. One thing I'd ask is if this, and how do you address this, is developing their notion that I have a choice in how I can react. Cass and both you recounted some truly dreadful situations, and how do you help them develop the notion that even though I am in a bad situation, how I can react to it, I can have choice in I should say I can respond to it rather than only reacting to it. And and there was something else I was going to tag onto that, and now it just popped out of my head. But so basically, how can you help them see that I know what I was going to say, is the notion also that, that kindness, regardless of what you're doing, what category that you're doing, the B of being kind overlaps everything. So I'm wondering how can you develop the notion I have choice, and that, you know, children being kind to each other, even if the adults around you aren't being kind. How can children be kind to each other as opposed to being, you know, mean? We hear about kids being mean to each other.
Now, I go back to when we actually explore values, I go back to how does it make you feel? When we can understand the impact that, you know, any situation has on us, for a child, it's as simple as, does that make you feel good in this situation? Or does it make you feel bad? Does it make you feel sad? And what would you do differently? So that then actually enables them to see what choices they have in any situation, of how they then respond to a situation, or how they even engage in a situation. So if somebody has actually been asked to be the labor of love for the day, how does that make you feel? Now, they may not necessarily have a choice because their mother has actually sent them out to do work. But if they see another child in that situation, and there is an opportunity for them to even help, that actual collaboration of joining them in that situation. Now, I'm talking about not necessarily anything that's horrible, but it might actually be, you know, to go and fetch water.
Mm-hmm.
They could help.
Mm-hmm.
That actual extending that olive branch to another child means that that child isn't alone. But we're also actually looking at team effort and how that actually makes them feel, but also how it makes the other person feel, right? That's going to bring them joy, even though it's not, you know, the best situation. They're walking potentially for 2 hours, you know, to go and get water. So it's that. We have to make it really simple. And the only way that we can enable children to really identify what's okay and what's not is, would that make you feel good?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great answer. A great answer. Yeah, reaching out to another child, collaborating, even in really challenging circumstances. That's great.
Wonderful question, Robin, and insightful answer, Cathy. And what you're talking about completely resonates with how we grew up in the third world. It's that peer group that allows you to practice things that necessarily is not available in your own surroundings. And in this process of peer group sharing, you develop skills, and you're not limited to what you are put into in your home, in your own environment. So it tend to become like a simulation. You're a businesswoman, you help businesses. There's a whole nother side to you than what we are talking about today. But you're bringing all of those elements in to working with children. And I see how you are bridging that gap. And then you're also helping the children get back to that business world that they're going to thrive, right? So how are adults receiving this?
Yeah, do you know, I often have people cry. And in a good way, right? Because I think for the first time, they're actually seeing what's possible, not just for the outside world, but for themselves. There's something that resonates in almost the pureness of going back to finding out who, you know, I do it with kids, but finding out who they are as adults, because they've not gone through that process. You know, particularly in the Western world, Cass, we are raised in an environment to chase what somebody else is doing, which constantly means that we are looking out. We're looking out for somebody to tell us what it is that we should be doing. But what we're actually showing children through our programs is to look within. So that becomes their aha moment. I've never done that. I've never actually stopped to ask myself, hey, what do I really want to do? You know, and I think that that's why when we reach a certain age, that's when we start to think there's so much more to life. Wouldn't that be amazing if we actually instilled that in children? Can you imagine the difference that we would have in the world? And that's what my bigger vision is. So passing on that knowledge that we learn, you know, from, I'll call it middle age, of looking within and starting to recognize that there is a whole new self that I haven't discovered, or more importantly, I haven't even given the opportunity to actually be seen or be heard. If children actually lived by that, honestly, the world is going to be such a different place. We will always be looking at things through the lens of a collective as opposed to me, me, me. And we would be more open to differences. We'd be open to collaborations as opposed to competition. That's what drives me.
I am tracking with you. Now, I have a question I have. I don't have $1 million, but I have this question. How can we have children from the developing world learn from the developed world, but also in reverse, children from the developed world learn from the children from these poor developing countries? Because there is learning to be done. Privileged children end up growing up not learning so many things in life until they hit a crisis. I come from a part of the world where we believe the true blessing in childhood is to have every unimaginable challenge put at your doorstep, because it's going to build you to be resilient, creative, and build a sustainable life, and truly know that your peace and happiness are coming from within, right?
Do you know, one of the visions that I actually had, particularly with the programs, was to actually make it a global program. The challenge with that is that sometimes in the communities that I'm working with in developing countries is that they have no internet. But wouldn't it be incredible if we actually had these programs that were actually run online for those in developing countries, whilst we also actually had the children who are actually in the developing countries be in that program? The learnings that would actually take place in those situations would be exponential. So that's ultimately my bigger dream, to be able to bring them together. We run these programs in very small groups. You know, I don't believe that we, particularly with the young groups, it's a maximum of 15. It's about impact. We can't give one-on-one attention if they're big groups. So we intentionally have them 15 and a maximum of 20 in any group. So we run multiple, obviously, of these sessions at any one time, but that also then enables them to connect individually. So that's... Sorry,
I was going to ask another quick question, hop in. And this is kind of on the other end of the spectrum, and I guess it falls under the broad category of how can you get these adults to behave better? You know, the descriptions that Cass is saying that you have said. And so, you know, how can you, or what are you doing, or how can you help the adults have their eyes opened up to, you know, how can I, or open up to, I need to treat my children better. You know, I need to, you know, not sell them into prostitution. And granted, I'm sure that this mother is utterly desperate, you know, to put food on the table, but, you know, but what other changes can happen so the adults in the room can be the adults in the room, essentially. And maybe that's an unanswerable question.
You're talking about, Robin, in developing countries where they actually use their children. Gosh, I don't know that I actually do have the answer, to be quite honest. It is, how do you actually create a situation that is sustainable. You know, remember, this isn't just a one time, because we can intervene once, but that's not going to solve the long-term solution. Without education, I don't know how we actually enable that to take place. And that when I say education, it's through the opportunity of discussion. It's through the opportunity of enabling that mother potentially to become financially secure, which is why microfinance is one of the things that I did very early in the piece. You know, it wasn't just working in the orphanages. It was then actually enabling and developing a program that these women could actually do to give them a different type of income. So, Cass, I don't know if you have any other suggestions, but for me, that was the only thing that I knew that I could do, was to have the discussion, not to tell them, but to actually explore what it was that was actually driving them to make that choice, and then to actually see what other things that I could introduce. And that might have been just to actually buy them 2 chickens. Those 2 chickens then actually enable her to have, you know, a job that might give her the money, you know, from eggs or from chicks that were actually being born. Cass, is there anything that you could think of? That was the only thing for me, Robin, that I could do.
Yeah, beautiful.
I love what I'm hearing. And Robin, what I am doing here in Belize is truly building a sustainability opportunity through the children. First thing we did is asked everybody in the neighborhood not to throw their plastic. And we as a community went and collected all of it. We cleaned them out. The children, I have 8 to 12 children in my yard, literally any given day. This is their safe place. They come to play. And the original draw was the smell of the food, but if food brings them in, open the door, get them in. So what we started doing is taking those plastic and getting the farmers to donate dirt, get the agricultural ministry to donate seedlings, and we all started planting.
Yeah.
So got the parents involved. Social media is huge here. So let's watch how the plants are growing. Children are growing cucumber, they're growing radish, they're growing lettuce. And then I taught them on how to think about that as adding to the bottom line. Every cucumber is saving your mother $1. So you may not be bringing money, but you're bringing other things that money is needed to buy, but now your mother doesn't have to worry about it. So children are getting involved in growing food. And I call this program Growing Prosperity, because growing prosperity can be looked at in so many different ways. I'm also teaching them about ingredients and what Mother Nature has given Belize that is already in nature. And how do you start cooking with it? So you prevent illnesses, diabetes, high blood pressure, stroke. All of these things take up money too. So children can't work, but they can be creative in their way of thinking, saying, how can I contribute? And in this process, how am I building self-reliant and sustainable life for me? I mean, technically, if you grow your own food and you're healthy, you don't need to have a job, right? People go have a job because they need to put food on the table. And I come from a culture that fundamentally believes that if I don't put my hand on the dirt, you cannot put your hand in the food. So me putting my hand in the dirt is the first step for the entire self-healing ecosystem. So I started with growing food, teaching them how to cook. I am getting technically the restaurant that I am going to be using to teach them to cook and teach them all these skills. This afternoon at 3 o'clock, we're doing a grand opening. And the children are cutting the ribbon. And so in preparation for Christmas, we're doing these. And then one of the other things we're doing is we're using all the plastic and teaching the children craft. How do you do things with plastic? And then you can sell. So we're going to teach them how to make Christmas ornaments. And we're teaching them finance and budgeting. There are more than one way to get at this, But as you said earlier, Cathy, when you don't grow up in this environment, you don't see what you can't see because it has not been something you experienced.
Yeah.
I consider myself so blessed in a way that I come from the developing world. I've lived there, I've been there. And there are so many more ways to do this without getting money involved at all. And I think that is the one lesson the West forgets when it comes to the poor countries. They may be money poor. Belizeans will tell you in a heartbeat, we're money poor, but we're rich in every other way. So let's cultivate that. And education is key. Poverty financially is one thing. Poverty of the mind and poverty of the spirit is a completely another thing. So to me, making sure the poverty of the mind and poverty of the spirit is not the issue, then we can give them the tools to overcome all of it. So that's how I am dealing with it, Robin. Truly, with no money involved, just time and love.
Yeah,
And
that's awesome.
Gina, that is actually so true. It actually then enables that genuine creativity to take place. You know, we were joking the other day, my kids were saying, oh, we grew up in a military life, you know, it was marching. And now they said that in tongue in cheek, but the reality is that I actually showed them financial literacy from the ages of 4 and 8. I didn't actually tell them what to do. You know, I actually said to them, negotiate with me. You want to do chores and you want to be paid for it? You tell me what you want to be paid. I'm open to it. They set up the contracts. Then I gave them the opportunity. Do you want insurance just in case you're sick? Starting them to think, making decisions. So we'd still get paid even if we didn't do our chores. Yep, because you had insurance. Oh, okay. But then teaching them to pay it forward. So twice a year, you have to set aside 10% of everything that you earn to actually donate to somebody or something that's important for you. So we get them to think about community and then to think about goals. So you have to put X amount aside every week that goes into your pocket money. You can choose to do that, whatever you want with that. The next stage is short term. You want to buy a little toy? Sure, you can save for that. Put that into another bank account. And then the long term. Do you know the kids still, they're 25 and 30. They still live by that. Right?
Because those are life skills. Absolutely. So I could talk to you for hours, Cathy. We're going to pick this conversation up another day, another time. Definitely. But before we go, I want folks to know how to get in touch with you.
Well, the easiest way is either through my website, which is Solutions2you, and it's the number 2, all in one word, .com.au. I have an ability for you to go straight into my calendar and book a time, or through LinkedIn, and that's just through Cathy Dimarchos on LinkedIn.
Thank you so much, Cathy. I am so honored that you carved time out of your working days in the US to have this conversation. And I cannot wait to work with you to do all the things we're going to do and continue this conversation. And thank you for our audience, live and otherwise, for being a part of this journey, because it's only together we are making this a better world. And only together we can lay the foundation for our children to become leaders. So go out there as you do every day, living your purpose. Make sure you embrace a child, literally and figuratively, and spark their light, inspire them, ignite their passion. And in that process of transforming their life, you'll be surprised how touched and how transformed you are going to be.